The 2021 NFL Draft is just 24 days away, so that means we have just a few more weeks to hypothesize what the Denver Broncos will do with their 9th overall pick. We'll discuss a few of their options coming up on tonight's edition of Broncos Beat. As always, I'm your host, Alexis Perry, joined tonight by NFL Draft expert from CBS Sports, Chris Trapasso, Ryan Edwards from Broncos Country Tonight on KOA Radio, and making his Broncos Beat debut, Zac Stevens from DNVR. Zac, welcome to the Broncos Beat family.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so pumped to join this awesome show.
Well, we are so stoked to have you. As we get closer and closer to the NFL draft, the speculation continues to grow. Will the Broncos trade up and try to snag a future franchise quarterback? Will they trade back and try to stockpile picks, or will they stay put at number 9? So let's start with the possibility of trading up. The Broncos have expressed their confidence in Drew Lock, but the top 5 signal callers in this 2021 class have the potential to be franchise-changing quarterbacks. So who are some realistic trade partners for the Broncos if they're looking to move up for one of these impending stars?
Well, the good news is there's 2 great opportunities for the Broncos to move up. You have the Atlanta Falcons at 4 and the Cincinnati Bengals at 5. And the great thing about both of those teams is the Broncos may be the best trade partner in with anyone in the first round with those teams, because you have Carolina who wants to move up, but Atlanta's not going to want to trade with a division rival in order for them to get a potential franchise quarterback. So they're not going to want to do that. And the other teams that are ahead of the Broncos in the draft, they're probably not going to want to jump to 4 with the Falcons. So the Broncos are the closest team there. And would the Falcons really want to go to 15 where the Patriots are? I think that 9 is a perfect spot for them. And then the Bengals as well. They're a team that could absolutely trade back. And also the good thing is both of those teams are probably looking for a dynamic weapon. Now, there's a lot of weapons in this draft, so they could find one at 4. They could also find one at 9.
Yeah, for the Broncos, I think that you're eyeing that 5th spot. Teams have been calling about the 4th spot with Atlanta, and Atlanta just hasn't been wanting to move, at least up to this point. I think they got their eye on Kyle Pitts, or if Trey Lance somehow falls to them right there. So if Atlanta so far hasn't been willing to move, then yeah, you're probably starting at 5 there. And again, the numbers say you're going to have one of those quarterbacks, but you have to like that guy. So these are exploratory calls you do before the draft even starts. It doesn't seem like Miami at 6 probably is looking to move back, since they've already kind of been yo-yoing, and they don't really need more young talent, at least not at this point. And then Detroit would be the other natural spot there, just to get in front of Carolina. And that's kind of what this becomes, because you know that they're going to be probably the most aggressive team at the top of the draft.
Yeah, I think the points that Zac and Ryan brought up are spot on, that the teams at 4, the Falcons and the Cincinnati Bengals at 5, they could trade back. But I have a feeling that the Falcons are going to pick Kyle Pitts, and the Cincinnati Bengals are either going to pick Penei Sewell or pair Joe Burrow with his former LSU wide receiver in Jamar Chase. So to me, the Detroit Lions at number 7 overall make a lot of sense. They're clearly rebuilding. Even though they have Jared Goff, they have a new head coach, new GM. They have a ton of needs just to get that one spot ahead of Carolina. It wouldn't cost the Denver Broncos a lot going from 9 to 7. So I more realistically look at the Lions as the team that they'll be calling and will have legitimate conversations with come draft night.
Very interesting. All right, guys, the rumor mill is churning out Mac Jones to the 49ers at 3, which is bananas, but let's unpack that for a second. Bear with me. If that were to happen, we'll see Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Mac Jones off the board, 1, 2, 3. Atlanta, like you said, it seems like it'd be tough to pass up on Kyle Pitts or even Jalen Waddle. Like, hypothetically, if Denver can somehow get a deal done with the Bengals at 5, they could choose between Justin Fields or Trey Lance. I know it sounds crazy, but somehow if they find themselves in that position, who do you think would be the best fit for the Broncos?
Man, I gotta say, I think Trey Lance, he has all of the potential. What I say is he has the Patrick Mahomes potential, where he has everything that you like. He has all of the physical tools, but then he also has the mental makeup and that excellent football IQ. That's something that teams are going to go crazy for. And Alexis, that just like you said, I think that'd be crazy if he made it to 5 just because of all of those features he has.
He has all the tools. I'm not going to lie to you on that, but not so fast, my friend. I'm going to go Justin Fields here. He's got an adjusted completion percentage of 83%, over 83%, and that is the best since 2016. Look, I'm telling you what, this guy has played against bigger level of competition. He's shown up in those opportunities. Did we all forget the playoffs? Did we all forget how well he played in that? I certainly didn't. So for me, it's a no-brainer. If Justin Fields is there on the board somewhere at 5, you make that call, you trade up, and you talk to the Bengals and say, hey, you can get one of your top offensive tackle options at 9. They're not going to have a problem because they can get either of the top 2 guys. Both of them might even be available at 9. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, I think Trey Lance and Justin Fields are pretty similar quarterback prospects, that they're supreme athletes. They have big arms, but Justin Fields is just more NFL ready. He started 2 full seasons at a Power 5 school, a marquee program in Ohio State. And I think we've seen of late, a lot of the quarterbacks that have ultimately failed or not lived up to the hype in Denver were these project-y types. So not to say that I don't like Trey Lance as a prospect. I think he belongs inside the top 10 for a lot of the reasons that Zach pointed out. He is just immensely talented. I think Justin Fields has that high ceiling, but a much higher floor, and is more NFL ready to play as a rookie and play well.
So Chris, I gotta ask really quick then, when you talk about that, where does Mac Jones fit then? Because he's probably the most NFL ready outside of Trevor Lawrence.
Well, I will say that I think if the Broncos stay put at 9 and are just behind closed doors saying we want a quarterback more than anything else, I don't think Mac Jones would be a terrible pick for them. I mean, I don't have him graded that high, but to give him a situation similar to what he had at Alabama, good offensive line, tons of weapons, let him run in Pat Shurmur's offense that features a lot of play action, a lot of bootlegs. Mac Jones might actually kind of be the sleeper pick to go to the Broncos at 9 if they can't move up or move back.
All right, Chris, this might sound like a silly question, but before we go to break, could you see the Broncos trading up for any position other than a quarterback?
I couldn't. There is a pretty big need at right tackle right now, and we know that Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater, they can play either side. They're elite prospects at that position. But if you're moving up, if you're new GM George Paton, you're moving up for a quarterback. There's a lot of good offensive skill position talent. We know the Broncos don't need that, and not as much top level defensive talent, which is what the Broncos need. So if they make a move, if we hear that happen on draft night, it's probably going to be for a quarterback.
All right, well, there's a chance the Broncos could trade up in the 2021 draft. They could also shake things up and trade back. We will discuss who the Broncos could attempt to strike a deal with coming up after the break. Welcome back to Broncos Beat. Alexis Perry here alongside Zac Stevens, Chris Trapasso, and Ryan Edwards. Guys, last segment we talked about the possibility of the Broncos trading up, but I feel like the odds are higher that the Broncos actually trade back and stockpile picks as George Paton builds this team through the draft for years and years to come. So if that's the route that they take, who are some intriguing trade partners for the Broncos if they want to pick later in the first round?
Well, I think the biggest names that's going to come up is the Minnesota Vikings at 14. You have that relationship already. It's an easy call to make. And for the Broncos, they get to move back a little bit, see what's there. They may even be able to have a chance to move back twice. I mean, honestly, we've seen that even with the Broncos. John Elway's done that in the past too. So you have 14 there with the Minnesota Vikings, 15 with the New England Patriots if they are eyeing a quarterback that happens to slip down to 9. And if you want to get into the 20s, I'd even consider 20 right there with Chicago. I mean, honestly, with the Chicago Bears, even though they've come out and said Andy Dalton is our unquestioned guy, come on, man. If you have an opportunity to get a quarterback in the future instead of starting like quarterback 28, I think you have to take that shot.
Yeah, I think the Minnesota connection is one to really watch too, because the Vikings have 11 picks in this draft. So they are going to be rife to trade up potentially if their offensive tackle is there, if there's an edge defender or a defensive tackle that they like. We know that their head coach, Mike Zimmer, does kind of lean defense. 2 other teams that I'll bring up, the Chargers at 13, they are certainly in the market for a left tackle. They don't really have one right now. They have to protect Justin Herbert. And then number 17 overall, the Las Vegas Raiders. We know what happened up front this offseason. They had a mass exodus. A lot of their established blockers are now on different teams. If they're, Penei Sewell falls, if Rashawn Slater falls, they could be calling the Broncos at number 9. So I think really every pick, maybe starting at number 12 or 13, all the way into the 20s, the Broncos will have a lot of people calling George Paton on draft night.
Well, you better get a little division bump if you're trading for with one of those teams. That's for sure. A little premium there.
Yeah.
And I'm all about getting a first round pick back if you're going to do this. So if the Broncos are going to trade back, I'd rather them go as far as possible. And another team, Ryan said the Bears at 20, another team, Washington at 19, I could see being a possibility. And you may not get a first round pick going from 9 to 19 or 20, but if there's a quarterback there, there's a quarterback premium that you could get. And man, that's when I'm okay with the trade back, because on my board, I have, including quarterbacks, I have about 20 good players that I really like in this board. So if you're able to move back, pick up a first round pick, and you still get one of those guys, that would be a huge win, even though it's not the exciting pick of trading up.
Well,
Yeah.
and the thing is here, you can, if you think about if the Broncos can somehow execute a trade for like Sam Darnold or Gardner Minshew, maybe even Nick Foles, if they do something on draft night or right up into it, you're going to probably want another day 2 pick, right? So yes, of course, we're talking about future first, and that would be great. But even then, if you can just trade back a few spots, reacquire another day 2 pick, I think that would be a great spot for the Broncos.
If you're talking about stockpiling picks, do you want it to be for this year's draft or next year's?
That's a really good question. I would say, I mean, it sounds like Zach and Ryan would want it to be a first rounder in 2022. I think that's kind of the dream for any team. But I think looking at this roster, especially with some of the additions on defense, and we know how young that offensive skill position group is, getting back Courtland Sutton, I think the Broncos are ready to compete for a playoff spot this season. And we don't really know what's going to happen with the quarterback spot, but I think I wouldn't hate to see at least another half season of Drew Lock with a right tackle in place and with Courtland Sutton back and a better defense, year 2 with Pat Shurmur as the full-time starter. I wouldn't mind if the Broncos got a second and a third rounder in this year's draft to continue to build the team.
Well, and so Chris, why I like going for next year's draft is because if you are trading back, then you are going in on Drew this year, because then you're probably getting a Nick Foles type of hedge with him. And then I like it because then if Drew does succeed, well, then that's fantastic. If Drew doesn't succeed this year, then you have the capital next year to move up in the draft and go get your guy. So it really would be going all in on Drew. And Chris, I agree. I mean, I love this roster. If you just get average play from a quarterback position this year, I think it's a playoff team.
But to add to Chris's point here, I just want to throw in, you have to consider the eventual rebuild that needs to happen on this defense, right? I mean, you got several DBs on 1-year contracts. You got to make a decision on Von Miller again. You have to make a decision on Bradley Chubb. So, I mean, there's so many things that are happening on this defense. And, of course, your inside linebackers are also on 1-year deals. So the eventual rebuild of the defense could start as soon as this year. So if you're trading back, adding day 2 players that will eventually be starters, may not starters this year, but will play a role, but eventually will be your starters, that could also be a strategy.
Yeah, this defense looks great on paper right now. But because of that, let's say the Broncos are moving back. Which position are they moving back for? Is it a corner? Is it an inside linebacker? What would you guys actually see the Broncos trading back for?
I think it could be a plethora of spots. It could be that right tackle position. I think Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State would be a great prospect for the Broncos to get. He can plug in right away at that right tackle spot. The linebacker group with Jamin Davis, Zaven Collins, Micah Parsons if he falls. There's like 3 or 4 top tier linebackers that feel like they're going to go somewhere from pick 15 to pick 25. Or they could go corner. It's a very deep cornerback class from the middle of the first to the middle of the second round. So really a lot of the Broncos needs after quarterback, I think, align with the strengths of this class positionally.
Yeah, and especially on the defensive side. I mean, most of those positions outside of right tackle that you mentioned, all on defense. And Ryan, it goes to your point of rebuilding the defense now, getting that youth in there. And yeah, JOK is a very interesting one who I think could be right in that 15, 20, 22 range for the Broncos.
Yeah, they have to kind of think about this in terms of, and I'm glad you keep bringing up right tackle, because yes, you do have a starter there, assuming he plays this year, right? But the fact is, again, you think about this 3-dimensionally. By next year, you don't, maybe, if you decide to move on from Juwan James. So for the Broncos, or at least as they sit right now, they have to think about the future of these positions on defense. But offensive tackle, yeah, you got your left tackle. The right tackle is a major need. And the last thing you want to do is go into free agency again next year and say, boy, we're going to try to fill it there. Maybe we have to fill it in the draft. So, yeah, I mean, one of those things that you think about ahead of time, get those guys in the building, get them working with Mike Munchak, and then you're going to hit the ground running next year.
I do want to talk a little bit about JOK for a second. Chris, I know you had him ranked pretty high on your top board. I think he was number 9 on your list when I last checked. So the Broncos seem to always be in the market for an inside linebacker. Is this the year that they actually pick one?
Well, I think to a lot of Ryan and Zach's point, it's that to get a head start on rebuilding the defense, I think Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah would be the perfect guy to do it because he is the modern day slot defender, strong safety, inside linebacker. He can cover down the field. I really think that do it all. He's my top or my highest graded defensive player in this draft class. Very sudden, very explosive, great tackler, great in coverage. Wherever you want to play him and however you want to label him in your defense, I think he would kind of signal the future for this Broncos defense. So if they trade back and get Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah at like 16, that would be a home run for the Broncos.
Hat tip to you for being able to pronounce his last name.
I've said it so many times during draft season, it kind of just rolls off my tongue at this point.
It reminds me of Okuwebunam. Like you just got to do it.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
I'll stick with JOK, but very impressive, Chris.
JOK. You guys, coming up after the break, what are the pros and cons of staying put at 9? We'll discuss that. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for sticking with us for this final segment of Broncos Beat. All right, guys, we discussed moving up, trading back, but what if the Broncos are content with the 9th overall pick? What's the upside at staying at number 9 and what's the downside?
Well, the biggest upside is that they're most likely going to have the pick of the litter in terms of all defensive prospects in this class. There's going to be a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of receivers and tight ends, and maybe offensive linemen that go within those first 8 picks. So if the Broncos don't want to trade back, if there is a defender, whether it be Kwity Paye, someone at linebacker, a corner, to kind of bring some youth to that secondary, they can stay put and have their pick of the litter on defense. The con is that if they really want a quarterback and they have their eye on Trey Lance or Justin Fields, or maybe even Mac Jones, they're probably not going to be able to just stay put. They would have to move up to get that player. So it's a kind of a dicey situation, but if they want defense, they can probably just stay put and pick whoever they want.
Yeah, I think you put yourself in a good position there to take a premium player, and you have your option there. You heard perfect of the top 2 offensive tackles. You're going to bring one of those guys into the building. You have an option of an elite pass rusher, whether you want to go Kwity Paye or Jalen Phillips, a guy that's a quote unquote riser on a lot of boards. So, I mean, there's just so many things you could do there. And, one of my personal favorites, hey, if Kyle Pitts somehow slips down to you at pick 9, I mean, my goodness, I know everybody's like, well, no, a tight end. They already have a great tight end. Think big picture here for the Broncos to add a guy like that can play the X, that can play split off, that can play in line. You can move them all over the field. Think about all the power and speed, and not to mention the fact your red zone offense just improved. Look, this is a low-ranked offense. Last year, they struggled in the red zone. They struggled all over the field. I think anytime you can add any kind of firepower, you should consider it.
If you stay at 9, you'll get an elite player. And that's not something that happens every single year at 9. And like Chris said, you could get the number 1 defensive player in this draft if you stick there because of just how offensive talented this draft is. You could have 3 receivers and a tight end go before the Broncos pick at 9, especially if there's a run on quarterbacks. Then that would just be huge to get that, especially for Vic's defense. And then look what George Paton would have invested in Vic Fangio and this defense this offseason.
All right, I love asking everybody this question. Are you a BPA guy or a need guy? And which direction do you hope George Paton takes?
Well, I, as a draft analyst, am always best player available. Like that is my philosophy. I think to a lot of Ryan's points, you have to look for the future. And we know in today's NFL, especially this year with a record number of players signing 1-year deals after what happened with the salary cap due to COVID, you need to plan ahead, not for 4 or 5 years down the road, but even the next season. So even if there is someone like Kyle Pitts there and you're looking at Noah Fant on the roster, draft the highest graded player on your board. I think that's the way that most GMs lead. But I think when you're setting up a board, you kind of tailor it to your needs, and you might grade an edge rusher or an off-ball linebacker, or in the Broncos case, a right tackle a little bit higher than other positions. But I'm best player available, especially inside the top 10. If you're picking there, you have a lot of need for talent on your roster. I think the Broncos do right now.
I'm 100% with you. I love BPA. You know, people are freaking out about, oh, what if they draft a cornerback at 9? It's like, well, you know what? You have 3 DBs that are on 1-year contracts. Get that guy in the building, getting him work with your DBs, getting him work with Justin Simmons, an opportunity to hit the ground running again next year. I don't really think there's a lot of positions right there that I absolutely wouldn't consider. Maybe wide receiver. That'd be like the one, but only because you went 1 and 2 last year with that position. There's very few positions that I look there and I say the Broncos don't have any interest whatsoever.
Well, and I think George Payton's a BPA guy too. Take the best player available, because he's a guy that, as we know, he's going to be in every conversation, but he's not going to force anything. And I think that's what BPA is. If you're picking for need, then you are going to be forcing things at times. And I think George has done a great job this offseason of really plugging every single major hole outside of the quarterback position. Now, he could plug that by making a trade, or he could take care of that in the first round. But I really think that George's approach is BPA, and that really is the best formula to build a team for the long haul.
You have to take the best player available, because if you don't, another team's going to show up with them and beat you with them. So, guys, before we go, I just have to know, who do you believe would be the best prospect team pairing at 9? Really quick.
I would really like Jalen Phillips. Ryan brought him up earlier. He checks all the boxes for me. If he didn't have the concussion history at UCLA, and just either played there or started his career at Miami, he would be a slam dunk top 10 pick. I think there's the only concern with him is that 1 year of elite production and the concussion history that led to his early retirement when he was at UCLA. He's long. We know from his pro day, he's crazy athletic. And in terms of staying on theme here, to build that defense for the future, get him 1 season learning from Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, he could really be a top end edge rusher by his 2nd season.
All right, you sort of stole mine there, but I do like Jalen Phillips quite a bit. I'm going to stick with Kyle Pitts just for fun, because that's the thing. This is fun. We're all talking about in theory. You just think about what the speed could be on the field for this team, the size advantage, and also the variety of things that Pat Shurmur could work with. I mean, you can talk about the red zone with Alberto Cuebanam, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, and Kyle Pitts. My goodness, man. I mean, it gets ridiculous. And then again, maybe Jerry Jeudy just kind of running underneath. Who knows? I think it could be fun.
Man, that does sound fun. And speaking of fun, I'm going, give me any of the top 5 quarterbacks. I love them all. I made the argument for Trey Lance earlier, guys, and you made great points about Justin Fields. I would love any of those 5 guys.
Oh, I love it. You guys, this has been so fun living in the land of hypotheticals with the 3 of you. I've loved it. So thank you guys so much for being here. For Zac Stevens, Chris Trapasso, and Ryan Edwards, I'm Alexis Perry. We'll see you next week.